Everybody excited to be here for LudoNarraCon. I am so hyped to have one of my favorite folks in the industry who makes some of my favorite games, Adam Hines from Night School. So excited to have you rocking with me on the con stage in our fireside chat today. How are you doing? How's everything going?
Good. It's going really, really well, actually. I can't always say that. There's sometimes fires that needs to be put out and but yeah, it's going really well. How about you?
I'm doing okay. It has been a really interesting year. Of course, with 2022 being what it is, it's a lot of stuff in flux and lots of
Yes.
things moving around. But I think,
Yeah.
for most folks, when they ask that question, I'm like, you know what? I'm okay. I'm doing all right. I can't complain too much. I know a lot of folks are like, I hate the
Yeah.
stuff. I'm like, no, you know what? I'm all right. I'm not too bad. I'm doing all right.
You're
Do,
good.
doing
Okay. Yeah.
okay. So I'm extremely excited to have you on because I am a huge fan of the work that you all do at Night School. I think the games you put out into the world are
Awesome.
brilliant and smart and funny and witty, and they all feel extremely. What's the word that I'm looking for? They feel extremely like grounded, not only in the
Mhm.
worlds that they reside in, but our universe, our multiverse that we're in currently, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I want to bug you about a lot of stuff today, but the first things I want to kind of dig into are, when I play a night school game, I'm always thinking about the interactions between characters, how those conversations are unfolding, and how those characters are having those kind of run of a gamut of emotions and thoughts and feelings. I want to talk to you about, why are conversations such a core part of the games that you all make?
Yeah, it's a good question because we started the studio with kind of a really simple, or at least easy to explain goal. It turned out to be not a very simple one, but uh, the goal has always been to just tell stories in a unique way, and just being able to use the art form of games to really just tell a narratively driven experience with characters you care about, with goals that you can relate to and understand, going through something personal that is reflected by a much bigger, grandiose, probably chained to a genre type of an issue, like you're dealing with ghosts, or you're stuck in hell, or you're taking a spaceship out to outer space. But the characters are still going through a very kind of personal, much more relatable experience in their own life that can kind of tie to that. And you can tell a story in a million different ways. Like, characters don't have to talk a million miles a minute like they do in our games. It can be very non-verbal. It can be more experiential. And for us, it became a real linchpin of the studio, just the way characters talk to each other, mostly just because that's what we were interested in, and that's where kind of our skill set was. We started very small. We were only four people at the time
Mm.
that we were starting OXENFREE, and we really just kind of we were starting to kind of craft what the feeling of the story would be. Like, Sean and I, my co-founder and cousin Sean Kerr Rankle, we're both we're just obsessed with the very Spielbergian 80s 90s nostalgic feeling of genre mashups like ET and Poltergeist and Lost Boys, and just movies that have a lot going on from with a lot of different tones. And we kind of just looked around the room at who we had, and we are like, well, what are you good at? And what are you good at? And what can I do? And I was like, well, I can write people talking a lot. That's what I can do. So they're like, great. That's how we're going to tell the story. It's going to be conversational. You're going to have dialogue bubbles above your head. And everything kind of clicked into place with that. It became really the kind of singular goal of that first game, Oxenfree, of just making a game where you walk and you talk, and you're not kind of siloing those experiences, meaning like you don't have some gameplay and have a puzzle and then you have a conversation. We wanted the conversation to just run over everything that you do, to constantly be talking, to constantly be able to comment on the experience that you're having, to ask questions, to deal with other opinions and philosophies about what you're kind of going through at the same time. So there's a lot of ways to kind of convey an emotional experience, and we landed in a lot of conversations and a lot of humanistic kind of empathy engines almost of people really kind of sharing their experiences through their dialogue and how they talk, just because that's where our skill set kind of was.
I I love that you shared that, because one of the things that I always have come away from the games you all make, and especially with OXENFREE as being kind of that first throw into the night school universe in that way, was not only how you're all kind of using dialogue as the motivator and kind of, pushing element that gets you through the story, but was how pace was such a really interesting, layer of the conversations that you saw characters having and how they were all, there wasn't this stop and go that you usually see within games that you kind of are used to seeing in dialogue conversations and in trees and the ways that people have conversations. How important was it to nail pace when it came to kind of giving that verbal thrust for folks to be able to kind of get through games and have the characters really feel that authentic?
Yeah, it was really important. It was kind of, if not the most important aspect of how those conversations would feel. Number two, like right under just the characters feeling very real and naturalistic and almost like a play sense. Like very few people talk as witty and as charmingly and as forcefully and kind of in control of their language as hopefully our games feel. But that's a very kind of like stylistic choice there. But the pacing and the feeling of you can kind of get run over if there's three or four people having an argument, and if you're not clicking the button in time, you're not going to be able to get a word in edgewise. Or if you're just kind of musing to a friend and he brings up a topic that you can really latch onto and dive in more and more and more and really kind of dig into what they're feeling about that, instead of staying along kind of what the main path conversation would have been. All of that was really important just to get that sense of you're playing a game, yes, but with just very naturalistic flow of how a conversation actually works. You stutter and you stammer and you forget what you're saying and you jump to another topic, and people don't wait for you, just kind of in an idle animation waiting for you to say the next thing. Like, that's just not how reality works. So we definitely wanted to kind of have that be our flag of like, our game's going to have very naturalistic conversations that hopefully you kind of forget that you're just talking to this little AI walking character,
I feel like you've nailed that part in the games that you all have made. Like, because I think when I first sat down with OXENFREE, the thing that came away from that initially and instantly was like, oh, this sounds like stuff that I would have either said, or the tempo or the feel of those conversations feels like I have had those before. When you, as a writer, when you were thinking about how much dialogue was going to be important to, not only that initial game, but all the games you wanted to have made, what makes you interested in the kind of ways that dialogue works? What is it something that you saw from other games that you had played and you were like, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like it's hitting what I am hoping to get from these kinds of stories. As a writer, I'd love to hear you talk about, how you kind of tackled that and how the team kind of thought about that as well.
Yeah. One of our kind of our reference points frequently, which might sound kind of out of left field, was Gears of War. In those parts in Gears of War when you weren't ducking and hiding and shooting these giant bugs that are crawling out of holes, and it's just calm, and they're like, okay, we got to get to that church bell because that's our next like way station with the medipack or whatever you have to do. And you purposely, the game kind of puts you on rails. They put away their guns. You can't even pull out your guns and even like do anything but walk, and you're just walking at a very very directed pace with your friends and with the people that you're on this team with. And you're just talking about like, I can't wait till the war is over because I'm going to go hug my kids, or I'm going to buy this car when I'm out of this town. And we were like, God, what if there's a game where it's just that? It's just you're walking in between missions and just having these very humanistic conversations. So that was one that was like, they really nailed a feeling there that we wanted to kind of expand on. Also, we just saw, and I kind of approached whatever the word is, but just kind of what I want to get out of games and art in general is just, if something doesn't exist, that I really hope it would, just so I can experience it myself. And that type of a game, that type of just art within the game space of just, this is the thing we're gonna do, is have conversations be the gameplay. Just seemed like a really both interesting kind of creative challenge, and something I would naturally want to play and be really excited to try out and see what that meant. And that's kind of where all of our little additions to how conversations work kind of came from. So that part in OXENFREE, when you have a thought balloon pop up above your head and shows a picture of the character that you could be talking to, that could be not even on the screen. And we left it a little open and a little vague as to what that actually means. What it means is that you have said something or somebody else has said something, and under the hood in the game's code, it means that's changing what that character has thought about the other person. So if Alex is talking to Jonas and Jonas says, I hate popcorn, and Alex's head, it pops up a Jonas pick, that means that she will remember that now for the rest of the game, that Jonas hates popcorn. And that could potentially have an effect on something, it potentially go away and never return. But we started to add in these little kind of check marks and other ways to kind of almost gamify just what talking is, to make it feel like you're not just mindlessly making choices. We were really nervous that players, when they realized, an hour into the game, of like, oh, this is it. I'm like walking and talking and sometimes getting scared, and I got a radio and I can tune into things, and this is what the game is. That they didn't feel like, well, I can ignore the conversations until I get to a puzzle, or I can like kind of not pay attention to the things that Jonas is caring about and scared of. We wanted to really kind of always ping you and remind you, like, just like in real life, you could say a very off the cuff comment and the person you're talking to is going to take that to their grave, and you just meant it as like, I don't like popcorn, but that will stick to them for eternity. We wanted to get that feeling too, of just kind of make you a little nervous about if you're saying the right thing, if you're saying the wrong thing, and also kind of almost counter to that, make you not think as much about what the actual under the hood stuff is going on, and try and just kind of train you that what you're talking about is important, it's going to matter in this game, but just react by instinct, just how you would actually respond to that cool question or thought. Have you ever played and any other games where you felt like it really relied on and depended on kind of very naturalistic conversations?
Yeah, but it's one of those things that it's, to be super transparent, I feel like one of the things that I always come away with is, I feel like tone and setting help for me to dictate whether I feel like conversations are hitting that good spot. Like I am also, that whole, there was this one moment within the media space when everyone was so hyped up about Newsroom, right? And there was like, oh, yes, everybody is so snappy in the way that they talk. And I was like, but I don't know anybody who talks like this, right?
Oh, yeah.
I was like,
yeah.
I was like, people were hyped about that. Like, that was like the new standard of the way people should be able to talk within media, and how that snappiness was the representation. But yeah, like for a moment, it felt like there was a space where you had folks on various sides of that teeter-totter, right? Where there were like people who loved it and people who absolutely hated it. They were like, this makes no sense. I don't know any humans who talk like this. So when I think about the games that I play, I think a lot about, does the interaction feel authentic? Does the pacing feel authentic? Does the surrounding in which you find these characters, even if it's fantastical, feels like it is grounded within that space in a good way? So for me, it varies. So like, there are days when I love the stuff that Bethesda has done with the way that they do their topic trees, and there's days when I hate it, and I'm like, this is stunted and stilted and doesn't feel good. So
Yeah.
it winds up being a mix for me a lot of different times. It depends on the day, it depends
Yeah.
on the story, depends on so many different factors within that
Hmm.
spot. But I think what it makes me want to poke you about in return is, did you all kind of come to a space where you were like, this level of conversation when you're evaluating what good was in the
Hmm.
game? How did that change over the course of development across not only, your kind of biggest first outing in Oxenfree, but throughout the lineage of games with Afterparty and Next Stop Nowhere?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it kind of changed along with the goals of every game. So,
Mm,
Oxenfree, it was very much, yeah, we wanted to have a very particular feeling. We wanted it to feel like a very specifically a teen coming of age dramedy that
mm,
has both comedy, but the comedy would come from kind of a Seinfeldian. The characters are commenting on what's happening to them. Like the characters themselves are funny, not necessarily like the things that are happening to them are this hilarious jaunt. What's happening to them should be pretty scary, and sometimes they get scared. But sometimes, like human beings, like when you're caught in a foxhole, you'll kind of go to any defense mechanism that just helps you get through that beat. Whereas in After Party, I kind of on my own was like, I want to make a comedy. I just want to make something with a fantasy setting. I want to have magic. I want to be able to have kind of no rules, and I just want it to be kind of like a joke machine that also has heart, obviously, that also has moments of tension and moments when you don't know if the characters are going to be able to get out of a situation that they're in. But the goal there was flat out like, we want to make you laugh. As long as you're
mm,
laughing and playing the game, that's a success. And kind of along with that, yeah, I would say that our methodology towards how to approach conversations and how to approach having and yeah and like what is really good writing in every game, it does change based on just what we consider a success per the scene, per the game and the tone and the mood that we want to hit. So yeah, I mean the kind of the dumb answer is like every game it's different but in general I would say that we do try to take our learnings from the last title, whatever that last one is. We always like to just get a lot of feedback and say, what did you like? What did you dislike? Of course, me thinking everything I write is genius and brilliant. There are a lot of feedback. I'm like, well, you just don't get it then. That's fine. But there's a lot that I'm like, yeah, we should probably make that tweak and make sure that like the goals are explicable and understandable because there's a lot of times I'm like, well, realistically, they would like figure it out as they went along. But in a game, it's way less like writing for a script or for a book, and it's kind of like writing in a mathematical equation where you
mm.
have to always factor in what the player wants to do. Like you don't have to care if Johnny sitting in the movie theater wouldn't grab the gun at that point, as long as they can understand that why the character would, even if they don't understand why the character would. You could explain that a couple scenes later down the road in a movie or in a book, but in a game, if you have to pick up that gun, you have to know you have to pick up that gun and why. It's really hard to kind of have later reveals and things like that other media kind of get to rely on. So we always get learnings like that of how best to kind of pace out information, what's too much in information, what kind of veers it into feeling too robotically just giving you goals, and then you get to talk and then you get a new goal, so it's a fun challenge to kind of get that flow in and out of having things be very overlapping and kind of vague and realistic, hopefully, in how characters actually interact with each other, but also very strict, like this is what you need to do to win this game, because it is a game.
I want to believe at least at one point you get into your Shakespearean bag when you're having that day when you're like, I am a genius, and all
Come
of
on,
you,
come on, yeah.
as per
Exactly.
Adam decree, this is now what is going into the game. You have no say in what
You
happens
have
here.
no say whatsoever. No, and one huge one is we have a lot of which I totally understand
Yeah.
and sympathize with, when a player isn't put, because in our first games we could really only translate the game. We only had the budget to translate it to a couple different languages,
Mm.
and if you didn't speak those languages, or you just wanted to hear the direct VO that we recorded, which we were only going to be able to do in English, but you're not a native speaker. We had a lot of requests of like, can we turn off the timer? Like, can I like actually take a break and like read it and figure out what the choices are? And I have always pushed against that, probably to my great weakness, because sales would take off if you had that option. But I feel really strongly that that's such a core part of at least these first titles that we put out, of that the conversation does have that flow, and that is kind of like the pressure. I'm a big fan of the fact that games, it's kind of like its superpower as an art form, as it can challenge you. It can directly put something that you have to beat to actually experience the future of that art. You know, in a movie you could fall asleep and wake up and you'll still get to the ending, but in a game you have to actually get good at the game to see it, to see the whole thing. And that to me was like our one piece of challenge there. Was like, how are you going to deal with these conversations? They'll just keep coming at you. But I totally get the note, and I totally get the critique of like, can you just slow it down for me, please?
I get it too, but I think I think you all kind of landed in a really good spot, right? Where I think they felt like, you know, there was enough space to kind of get that exposition out, while also kind of still pulling the story along, while also, you know, again, you talked a lot about the agency of the player and making sure that that is satisfied in a really good way, not only in those really pivotal moments, but throughout the rest of the game too. What were the conversations about those layers, right? Because I feel like, and I would love to just sit down with folks who are doing this kind of work, because in my brain, as a person who doesn't make games like this or makes games at all, I want to believe that there is the big pyramid tree that has its branches, where you're like, all right, we're going to go down this lane, and then once we get here, we're going to make the branching point here. But when you're thinking about, all right, so we have to inject here a moment for the player to have an action. What are those layers of the development process for you all? Are you all thinking about the major beats first that need to kind of get nailed down, and then figuring out the minutia to get there? Are you thinking about the overarching story and saying, well, we have the flow of where this is going to go with the beginning, middle, and end, and then we'll piece in those parts? Like, how does that kind of work for a game where you're having not only this running dialogue happen, but you're also saying, at these moments, the player is going to need to do this, or this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and it's tricky, because you want to be able to have a lot of openness in the writing process, to be able to kind of like find it as you write and get into the scenes, and just figure out what the characters would naturally do, and almost I mean, it's a huge cliche amongst writers of like, the character is going to tell me where the story goes, but it is kind of an important aspect to not get too rigid with an outline, because then it can feel very kind of just plot heavy in a bad way. Like the characters are kind of suffocating under the stuff that they have to do, as opposed to what someone would actually do in this situation. So we're still very much worship at the altar of having a very strong outline of just every scene is very laid out. However, the key important beats there are just kind of what the information is at the start, that we know the characters need to know, and what they'll know at the end, and what their new goal is. And everything in between, we try to leave pretty open for once you get into the scene and actually start to like write it and craft it with a designer and a narrative designer. But everyone needs to kind of sign off first on very, very early on, just that initial like one sentence. Like, Afterparty is the easiest one. It's just two college friends die and go to hell. They have to drink their way out. That's like the whole game. That's just it wrapped up. And then from then, like, well, what does that really mean? Does that mean you have to find Satan and now drink him? Are you playing party games? Are you drinking against other demons? Are you having a lot of conversation? Like, what are you actually doing here? So then we drill into that, and we figure out kind of a big like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 structure. And again, just the big pieces of that, meaning the ins and the outs. And we're like, okay, and we'll figure out what the middle is after. So it's like, okay, Act 2 is all about this, Act 3 is all about this, Act 1 is about this. Yeah. And we can really start to clearly see like some big choices that could impact and affect how those acts kind of unfold. And then once that's all signed off on and everyone's high-fiving, yeah, it's going to be great. Then we start going like scene to scene. So it's like if Act 1, you got to start out this and you have to end like this, then it's just one level more. So once we're all in agreement on like these are all the big scenes, these are the characters that we're going to need, these are the important assets that we have to make. There has to be a chair here, there has to be a table over here because you're going to break it with the chair and do all this stuff. Then the writer can kind of be let off the leash and write the scene. And in the writing of the scene, if we're like, you know what, I know that we said that he has to come to this conclusion on his own because he's remembering his dead mother and what she told him about it's actually a lot more impactful. Maybe the narrative designer will come in and say, well, there's a kind of a better way to put this. Maybe they find it out by environmental story telling. Maybe he'll like piece it together through clicking on things, through just where he is, or through a fight that he gets into, and that reminds him of this thing. So in the writing of it, we kind of find what the character would kind of naturally do. Sometimes that makes big enough changes to like completely subvert our expectations of where Act 2 was going to go or where Act 3 was going to go. That's rare, but it can actually happen. And when it does, it's fun. It's good to get in a mode of really thinking of how the characters would push and pull these things. But we like to stay pretty rigid, at least with like the ins and outs, just because it helps designers, it helps the art team know what to make, and everyone can kind of work at the same time. You know, it's always a horrible experience when you go into a script read through and you're reading your great jokes and you're getting into your great character reveals, and all you see is just this white ashen faces of like, we can't make any of this. So we really try to outline it pretty firmly first, and then get into it then. Yeah.
I love that because that is a thing that I hear all the interviews I've done over the past almost 10 years of like, so who gets the ball first? Is it the writers? Is it the game design team? Is it the art team? Like, how do you know who gets to kind of start the process and moving down the line? But I love to hear that it is so collaborative in the way you've all kind of figured that out and figured out like where Definitely. You're plugging in to be able to figure out the good ways to get the best story that you want.
Yeah,
I want to dig back into what you just talked about with Afterparty, because I think the layer of gameplay, or at least kind of narrative hook that is in there, is the drinking in that game, which I think is really cool, because it is a thing that weirdly a lot of games stay away from in a lot of different ways, just from a general standpoint of like, we don't talk about that. We'll have bars and bottles that you can break forever, but no one ever drinks anything out of any of them. Which I find to be, I was like, this is not every video game is dry. Okay, fine. We're gonna say that that's the case. But I love that it was a part of the ways that conversations changed within the game too, which I thought was pretty brilliant. Yeah. When you all thought about that as being a game mechanic, how did you all think about the way that was going to kind of morph, you know, the way a conversation was going to start and potentially going to end? Usually I would think that there would be a pretty straight line with a couple of different branches on the tree to say, well, okay, we're starting a conversation here and then we're going to kind of end here. But I know most people who have had a drink or two and have gotten a little tipsy, they were like, I wanted to say that thing over here, but that's not where I ended up. How did that all work for you all during that process of creating Afterparty?
Yeah, no, it was a ton of fun, as you would expect. We were initially very cautious and wanting to be really sensitive to the idea that people would play this game who have very complicated relationships with drinking and the concept of drinking, either themselves or they have friends or family. And it was a big goal for us that it not feel like a win button. Like you just take a drink and everything you say is going to make your conversation better and it's going to get you out of situations. And that's all you have to do is drink, because we're like, that's a kind of a weird message to be giving people. Yes, it's in hell. Yes, we can kind of get away with it because you're doing horrible things. But we really didn't want it to feel like that. We wanted it to feel like a game that if you really didn't want to drink, if you didn't want to participate, you really could. You could talk your way out of everything except for those parts where we like really force you to, because some other character is making you. It's very clear it's not your decision to do this, but you have to, because you're going to burn in hell for eternity, and who wouldn't at that point? So that was like one key component of it, is just making sure that it wasn't always a positive thing, taking a drink and then being able to talk. It should be a very, this could hurt me, this could help me, I really don't know. And initially, as well, when we were starting to kind of plan it out and say, yeah, this is great. You'll be able to kind of pick some drinks at the bar, and it'll work more like kind of a Harry Potter potion. It'll really kind of
Hmm.
transform you into another kind of character type. So we kind of quickly veered into the realm of taking a wildly cartoonish approach to hopefully a very relatable concept of, you go out for a night and you say, you know what, I'm not going to have whiskey because whiskey makes me mad. I'm going to have tequila because I want to relax. And I just know those types of drinks affect me in that particular way.
Hmm.
In this game, you know that drink's going to make you talk like a 1920s mobster, or it's going to make you talk like a pirate, or it's going to make your conscience fly out of your body and you have to chase them around. So we definitely wanted to like elevate every kind of just that kind of basic idea into something that becomes really just insane and like a cartoon. So but of course that can, like you rightly point out, turn into a crazy spaghetti spider web that like never trunks back to the main story. Like if we had 100 years to make that game, you'd still be able to like hang out with the demon, be drinking and talking and on and making more and more mistakes. So it was tricky to be able to make sure, just like I mentioned earlier, being able to kind of ramble and being able to have conversations that feel like drunken, loose, I don't know where this is really going to go type of a thing, but still get you back to your goals and still always return you to what you're trying to achieve in that game. But yeah, it was just a lot of, like I said, just like math of figuring it out, of like, well, we can go this many layers deep and still have parity with the other drinking choices, so we don't feel like one is better than the other one, or one gives you more jokes or one gives you more content, and still get you back and still have the time that production needs to actually ship the game, still have the time to actually make and record all this stuff. So we, after a couple years of doing this, we kind of have like a sixth sense of like, okay, we're getting a little far with this, we need to pull it back, or we can do more, we can even add more and pile on more like secrets that the player can find. But that game in particular, I wanted 100 times more of what is in that game now, of being able to take a drink and I'm able to climb up on scaffolding and jump off, and what we got in, of course, is as wild as it is. I was still like, I want more, even more.
I mean, and also I love the fact that you understand me so well to know that tequila for me equals piracy as well. So like I turned into a pirate, not piracy, y'all. Y'all calm that down. But I love that because I think it did really work really well in terms of like giving them these characters this extra layer of, you know, it is hard to sometimes flip a character from, you know, I'll use some wrestling terms, you know, from babyface to heel, in some of those ways.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to give people those kind of extra layers without going through a lot of extra backstory and exposition to kind of get there. And it kind of felt like those drinks and those potions did exactly that, to be able to kind of give folks that other layer there, which was super cool.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, nice.
How fun was it to make demon characters and write dialogue for those? Because I think it's one of those things too where, you know, getting to play in this fantastical version of hell, when we all have our versions of what we think hell could be, and what it potentially, if it is a thing you believe in, what it could be.
Yeah.
How fun was it to kind of dig into that bag to say like, ooh, moving from OXENFREE into this, and you know, writing human characters and now writing these other kinds of characters that don't reside in the worlds that we live in.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. It was a lot of it's just a really unique writing opportunity. You don't really It's rare that you get to write characters that have been around for 10,000 years, that have seen so much and has so much collective history and has a lot of references that the players playing might not get. It's kind of a big thing for me that I like when conversations in just any form of art, books, movies, games, you can kind of feel like it's getting ahead of you and you have to kind of play catch up. An analogy that I like to use is it's the difference between getting told a story directly by someone and just sitting at the booth next to two really close friends telling a story to themselves. So the difference there is, like, if someone's telling you a story, pattern things to what your experience is, and they'll use reference points that they know you'll get. But if you're just overhearing a conversation between two people, they might slip into another native tongue that you can't
Mm.
understand for a beat. They might reference a story from the past that they both did, like, oh, remember when Johnny did blah blah blah, or he did that thing, and you're like, and you only get the general sense of it before kind of clicking back into the lane of what the story really is about. And I loved being able to do that with these demons, being able to reference these ancient kings and Babylonian gods and all this stuff that the players aren't expected to know or remember, but they're just meant to get the gist of it, and hopefully kind of ignite something in their brain to make them look up this stuff if they don't know, and kind of get curious about what these ancient beings are talking about. So yeah, it was a lot of fun being able to kind of play in that space of these characters that also have a totally different moral code and a totally different set of ideologies than we would ever expect to have or even understand at times. And having that huge cast, coming from OXENFREE, where you have a very tight knit set of friends and they all really know each other and they all have these detailed histories, and that has its own kind of challenges in how to kind of bubble all that stuff up to the surface in a way that feels natural. Having 100 demons that you're like just meeting for the first time, and they all have their own problems and they all have their own goals and challenges. It's fun to be able to have those vignettes of like, you're just going to dip into this character's life and learn about them and laugh a little and then pop back out and be on to the next thing. And yeah, one of our kind of rules was that we wanted to kind of say that every religion, every faith is right. None of them are wrong. They're all right. They're all correct. So it was great having that kind of bounce off of each other too. Just Christianity and Buddhism, and just if every single thing, even the ancient ones that no one practices anymore, they're all still there because they've been there since the beginning of time. Just having all those different, because I'm the type of writer where I prefer stories feel more like a conversation in itself, where there is no real like point or capper to it, where it's like, and this is the message of the thing that don't do this. I like if it's just like, this is about X, and we're going to talk about it and have a lot of different viewpoints, and what you leave with is what you leave with, but we're not really kind of telling you this is what we think. It's more like we're going to just have a lot of different viewpoints, and that game, more than anything that we've done, really offered up that chance to have a lot of viewpoints about a lot of different topics.
I feel like when I played Afterparty, it felt like my favorite summertime evenings back home in New York, walking through the village. It's a really that's a very specific term for folks who have lived in that space, because I'm from New York. But it felt like that, where you were catching all of these in earshot conversations and pulling them in, and you never really get a chance to fully embrace any of them in that bigger way, but you're just like, ooh, that one thing that stuck with me because I heard it in that tone from that person with that energy who had that thing. I feel like one of the things I also came across, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, was with Afterparty specifically, you had a pretty stellar cast of the folks like Ashley Birch and Dave Fennoy, who I love.
Yeah, he's great.
He's so dope. How did their performances interact or potentially change some of the way that the conversations and dialogue wound up going in the game? Did you feel like at some point you were like, damn, the way that person nailed that line, or there was an ad lib here that happened, like maybe we should finesse that to kind of lean towards the way that the performances were coming across? Did that happen as well?
Yeah, so it didn't happen as often as we would probably like it to happen, if only because of how rigidly structured these choices and these scripts are. So it's like, when the actors are finally reading them, like, and it varies wildly actor to actor how much they'll kind of make the lines their own. I'm usually the ones kind of directing these sessions, and it always makes me feel like a jerk to be like, I know you said there in this, but you need to show, like, you need to say it exactly how it's written. But the reasoning there is only because those lines all connect to a million other potential lines. So it's like we've gone through and made sure, like, if Lola in Afterparty says Milo, can you do this? The next line won't be Milo, can you blah blah blah, or like she won't say his name. So it's like if they add in his name to like make the line in and of itself more natural for them, it could make the scene feel weirder or less polished, or like we just weren't paying attention to that type of a thing. So ad-libbing is pretty rare, but we do a lot of going into the booth and the actor will perform, and I definitely like to try to write in the pocket of what the actor's strengths are, of why we hired them. Like even the best actor has their like the things that they excel at and the things that they can do okay, but these are the things that they're great at. We always definitely want to, after they've done a couple sessions, make sure that the character is kind of tailored to their particular strengths and what they like to perform too, because it's you want the actor to feel really engaged with the character and to make sure it's like they're not too much of a distance between what they understand what this character would do and how they're acting. We do make some minor adjustments, usually like kind of after the whole script has been read, and then we're going through and doing more like patch scripts and patching up holes and things. We'll go back and I'll make sure to kind of tailor things. But yeah, it's pretty actually rigid for the first bits.
Yeah, that makes sense. I appreciate the explanation there, because I think that's something that I think about a lot, where I'm just like, oh, I wonder if because you had and you have had across the games like so many fantastic artists kind of voice these characters, and it makes me think a lot about OXENFREE in that respect too, where you're writing for an age group that we are no longer a part of, right? You're writing for this teenage age group, and writing in that voice. How hard is it to kind of write conversations in voice or in tone or in that way to continue to make that feel kind of natural and engaging? Like, I know for me, I don't know what the kids right now are talking about. I feel older than old.
No idea.
Right?
Yeah.
I feel clue. Super old.
No idea. Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Everything that anyone younger than 23 is doing right now is a mystery to me. I have absolutely no idea.
Yep.
Writing for a 16 or a 17-year-old in the year of our Lord 2016 is on the surface, a very considerable, like, I am stepping into something. I might as well be writing something for someone who's like was born in Portugal. Like, I have no relative commonality there. But honestly, the way that we approached it is to almost totally ignore the fact that they are teenagers. We just wanted them to feel like fully recognizable human beings that are smart, that if they don't know what they want, we know why they don't know what they want, that really encapsulate and hit the themes of the game. And just because that's already a struggle, is just to write characters that feel like universes inside themselves, that feel like they have full realized personalities, that are also surprising, because you don't want them to fall into the idea of tropes or cliches. And that's kind of a big thing with me too, is and just in the studio, is just that we say this often, is that we're fine with the stories being very not predictable, but like tropes. Like Shakespeare never had an original idea in his whole life. Every story concept that he had was taken from something else 100 or 200 years ago. But the reason we still talk about him and the reason we still read those plays is because those characters, how they put things, are so specific and so personalized and are so beautiful and poetic. Even if Romeo is dead from the moment that play starts, the journey of how he puts what's happening to him and his feelings are what makes that play very unique and particular. So that's like always our whole focus, is just make these characters feel like very unique individual characters that you might not have met in fiction before, even if you can kind of know where the story of OXENFREE is going when you start it, in general. But how Alex experiences it should be surprising to you at all times, but in the best way. So surprising in a way that doesn't betray her character, and more kind of is always proving out how full her character is.
Yeah, I love that. It's one of those things that I am not cruising the young adult sections of Barnes and not Barnes and Nobles, because they're not there anymore. But I am not reading that kind of lit in the ways that I know a lot of young folks are. So I am removed from that layer of it. So I remember very specifically, and again, this is going to date me, so be fine, everybody at home. But I remember, again, there was this very interesting conversation around Dawson's Creek during that point of my growing up in my young years, and how that conversational tone felt very adult in a way that, you had that balance where folks who were like, I don't know any kids who talk like this, when there was a space where people were like, well, why not? Why isn't
I know.
there? Right? Like,
people absolutely ripped on that show because they talked too intelligently, and I remember being like, "How is that a bad thing?" I don't like art should be like art can be aspirational. It's okay. It's not always having to be this hardcore diegetic, stumbling and tripping over themselves, and we have room for both.
I mean, look, we know what the real deal was with that. That was just all the vocabulary haters in the world who were just like, I hate vocabulary with multi-syllabic words. I hate it.
Right. I know. Oh, it's terrible.
I hate it. I want to dig into something that I wanted to ask you about with Next Stop, which I thought was really interesting. You have the main characters of the courier and the bounty hunter being the kind of ways that the story's kind of wrapped around, and there being these two very, very different characters that are going through these kind of pivotal moments and having conflict be something that is going to impact or impacted the ways that their conversations move. How did you all move and navigate through that? And how were you pulling from, and what were you pulling from inspirational points to kind of really feel like the impact that you were trying to hit through that conflict was really nailing it from the story?
Yeah. Our two reference points to the entire development of that game was, it is Pineapple Express plus True Grit. That's what we always that game with. And it makes zero sense now after playing the game. We were always like, it's two characters who are at opposing viewpoints, and they're bouncing off each other, and whatever. But that was always what we were like, does this feel like True Grit combined with Pineapple Express? Yes, it's going in the game. If it doesn't, get it out of here. But that's honestly where we started, and it's like, and we threw it in outer space too. So we used those two as really kind of like, and because they're both kind of like road trip movies, even though Pineapple Express is like sleeping in their car half the time. So it's very specific. But of course, like an infinite more of like, oh, it should feel like this. It should feel like the mom from this scene, and the character from this scene. But yeah, we took a lot of inspiration just from like Odd Couple-esque movies and shows of just two people that are would never interact with each other, would never have any reason to interact with each other, and they're thrown together, and they have to because they have a forced common goal. But that game, it was fun to, and kind of in the same way that Afterparty, we could really dive into a lot of just the mythology of how this world is and the rules behind it. It was fun just having a lot of just random references to things that just fly in and out of the player's ear. And again, you're just meant to get like the gist of what they're talking about and how that relates to the two characters as they're going through their experience. That game, though, I will say we had a lot of problems really nailing exactly the tone of it. Like with OXENFREE, I felt like we did just a really good job of like, this is a part for this, and it nicely, smoothly transitions into this, and there's escalations and de-escalations. Next Stop Nowhere, there are still scenes where I'm like, God, we could have like nailed that to the wall if we had like another month to really like super craft it. But yeah, it was a ton of fun just getting the trying to get the balance right there of like, what would this guy say here to Sarah because she's doing X, Y, and Z, even though they're from totally different paths of life, Do you have this is where we get super nerdy. What are some of your favorite conflict movies or pieces of art? Because I think those pieces, because I have so many different ones that I think of in my head, but like, what are some of your favorite like conflict stories where you're seeing that push and pull happen? Yeah. Like, so man, I mean, the most recent one, which isn't even that recent, anymore is Green Room. Green Room, the
Yeah.
one where it's the and for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's an ultra violent movie. First of all, so if you're
Hmm.
not into bloodshed, don't check this out. But it's about a kind of a hardcore punk band that plays this neo-Nazi show, and they witness the Nazis murder someone, and they're stuck in the green room. They're stuck in this backstage area. They've locked themselves in, and they just have to figure out how to get out. There's like 1,000 neo Nazis outside on the stage, and like building strength, and it's just these 5, 6 kind of scrawny punk rockers who just have to put this puzzle together of how to survive, how to escape, how to contact anyone. And that was the last one that really kind of like blew me away in terms of how they stretched that out for a movie. I really love movies that give you kind of one small problem and the characters just have to solve it. So another one
Mm.
like Green Room is Panic Room, where it's just like,
Yes.
again, you're just stuck in a room. Every movie where you're just stuck in a room,
Yes.
I'm going to be great at it. Where you just can't, again, it's just all the ways she's trying to make contact with somebody and all the ways that they're trying to like stop them. Another random one is it's a movie called Jerry, and it's
Huh.
Matt Damon and I think it was Casey Affleck, and it's just the two of them, and it's based on a true story that's very sad about these two people that went on a hike and they just got lost. They just went on a hike and got lost. And they got lost for a couple days, and one of them actually murdered the other one. They got so discombobulated and so deprived of food and water, and they just kind of lost their minds. And one
Huh.
mercy killed the other one. And the entire time, it turns out they were 1 mile from a major road. They just had to turn
Oh.
right at any point, and they would have gotten it. So I really, yeah, so it's like stuff like that really is like, man, oh god. So it's just like getting those this what they're talking about and how their brains are changing, and their goals. You can really like extrapolate a full game out of just stories like Panic Room and Jerry and Green Room. And then like, of course, the like all time to me classic example is Die Hard. So it's a guy in a building having a bad day. He cannot get out. There's terrorists. One critic, it's always kind of stuck with me, which I really want to keep, is that no one is dumb in that movie.
Yeah.
Like John McClane, he makes the right call. The Gruber is making the right calls too, and it's just his henchmen are making emotional decisions that are messing things up for his plan, and just how that conflict works out. It's still a brilliant movie.
I love those choices. I feel like we could rock, man. Like I feel like we could go watch some movies and be like, we're gonna
Definitely,
have like the marathon of conflict movies, and it would be
absolutely.
freaking awesome. Um,
Yeah.
so we're sadly running out of time. I could talk to you for a whole other hour because
I
I'm
know, no, it's too bad.
so good. Again, dialogue and kind of chat choices and narrative choices are kind of been in games forever at this point. Where do you, as a creator, as an artist, as a writer, especially with Oxenfree 2 coming out, hopefully soon,
Mhm.
fingers crossed. Um,
Mhm.
where are you kind of seeing the possibility for how conversations and dialogue and good meaty conversations? What do you see the future of that looking like in games for yourself?
Yeah, for me personally, it's definitely trying to break a lot of the rules that I had earlier kind of outlined. Like, it's really important that you
Mm.
know exactly what goal to achieve. And it's really important that you can't really, or it's harder to withhold information and withhold kind of character reveals because you don't want to feel like you're cheating the player if they're kind of role playing as this person. Where, in Silent Hill 2, which I think is one of the greatest narrative games of all time, you don't really know a lot about your character, like important, vastly important details about your character. Now, the difference is that you're not making like conversation choices. And I think that's what really makes the players expect a level of understanding of the character that if you kind of go against that or have some secrets revealed later, they're like, well, if you had told me that, I wouldn't have made that choice, or I feel kind of betrayed by the game here. But to kind of, because I feel like we're almost in like a neoclassical period of
Mm.
games where it's very rigid, the rules and the structure and just what people want. But we're just about to like bust out of that. We're just about to have a lot more games that really challenge that and say, like, you don't need to really know exactly everything that you think you might need to know. We can have reveals later on. It can be more experiential. It'd be more like playing a play. I was really inspired and excited by Kentucky Route Zero, and that a lot of those dialogue choices I was what we would consider as a studio kind of arbitrarily making, meaning that there's no reason beyond just wanting to hear the dialogue spoken and see the reaction of the character. It's not tied to a goal. It's not tied to like a challenge. It's just living in the scene. And over the last 5 or 7 years, we've gotten a lot more games like that, and I think this is going to continue to build and build in a cool way.
I hope so too. I'm hoping to see less rigidity within the space too. It does feel like there is this interesting push and pull, not only from the ways that, and maybe really quickly, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is, how much of that do you feel is not necessarily driven by the audience's expectation, but I'm sure that there are also layers of that of, what the studio needs and they feel like is a reasonable way to kind of get to a profitable space, or, having that moment where you can say, well, like, our game is doing this. Are you feeling like some of that rigidity is kind of also in that push and pull, or do you feel like it's leaning towards a certain side that's kind of giving that space more reason to kind of, squish itself down instead of expand?
Yeah. I mean, I would love to just blame the audience. It's all your fault for making us write this way. But absolutely, it 100% is. It's scary to say, like, let's have a half-hour sequence where you don't really know why you're doing it, but you're just experiencing the art and the setting and the characters and being able to role play, and it's still fun. You don't have to have a strict goal here. You don't have to need to be racking up points and combos. You're just experiencing art right now with still a point. It's an emotional point. It's a philosophical point. It might not be a mechanical point, but it's still there. So I totally feel, that it's on both the audience and the developers to really push for more of that stuff and to support the games that are, just trying to kind of get out of that box. Because I'm the same way. I'll go and I'll see the craziest, zaniest, artiest movies and read books that's just the letter E repeated over and over. Oh, this is genius. And then when I get into the studio, I'm like, well, we need to know what we're doing, right, guys? So it's totally on me too. And then just wanting to, push that stuff ahead and just take risks,
I love that. I think that's the perfect way to end our conversation for today. Audience, right. Take the time to let it just wash over you. Enjoy the moment. Absorb it. Take all that goodness in. Adam, thank you so much for rocking with me today. Again, folks from Ludo, again, thank you for having me. Thank you for letting us have this conversation with all of you. I'm amazingly excited for OXENFREE 2 and all the work that you're going to be putting out in the next coming years. So again, thank you so much for being here. And everybody at home, we'll see you all very, very soon. Thanks again and take care.
See you later. Thanks.